Tansei Erica Violet Lee Netsika-san, Nasaskotomanik Nidotsen. My name is Erica Violet Lee, and I'm a student here at the University of Saskatchewan. I'd like to thank everybody for coming out today to support our event, No DAPL, a Solidarity Teach-In. We're here today on Neheo territory, Métis homeland, Treaty 6 territory, and the home of a lot of brilliant Indigenous students, professors, activists, resistors, thinkers. So I think it's really appropriate that we're gathering today to have this panel in solidarity with an international day of action for anti-pipeline resistance. We have a lot of great panelists, so I'm not going to drag this out. So this event is being put on by the Indigenous Joint Action Coalition, which is a group of students and professors at the University of Saskatchewan who are interested in pursuing Indigenous liberation, basically, and environmental justice events on campus. We had an event most recently on Colton Bushi as well, recognizing that environmental justice and social justice and Indigenous rights are inextricably tied together. So yeah, in a good way, I'd like to welcome our very first speaker, who is Sylvia McAdam. And Sylvia McAdam is an extraordinary land defender, one of the women who was responsible for the planning of the very first Idle No More teach-in held here in Saskatoon. She's traveled all over the world to talk about Neheo law, to talk about our creation stories, to talk about the legal orders held in our lands. And right now, she's at the forefront of defending her own lands up north in Mistahi Sipi, Big River, Saskatchewan. So our first speaker, Sylvia McAdam.
So thank you for that introduction. I want to thank all of the organizers for organizing this. I drove in with my brother. I want people to know I'm not alone. It's like the media makes it sound like I'm alone. When I'm land defending, I am not alone. I have my brother who's here, Curtis McAdam, and my family. I have them in the background. They're just shy. They don't like to be in the media a lot. I'm not. I'm very outspoken. But as a result, I get targeted a lot. I get attacked a lot. And I see that predominantly from men. And I want to be clear about that right now because as an Indigenous woman, I get attacked a lot. And I asked a few of my friends about it, and we came to the conclusion it's because, and I know this kind of sounds funny, but it's real. It's the reality of it. It's because I'm browner, I'm more outspoken, and I'm petite. That's the only thing we can come up with. So while I'm out, the reason why I'm saying that is that's very important to talk about. Those uncomfortable dialogues and discussions need to be talked about. I fully believe it's connected to the violence of women. And we've seen that when Idle No More first began. Man, were we attacked. You should see some of the emails of how the descriptions of how they want to do harm. It's very, very disturbing. So what does that have to do with my defending the land? Even while I'm defending the land out on my people's hunting lands, and these are unceded, unsurrendered lands, people have this misconception and have been misinformed, and I'm telling you right now, it's a lie that we ceded and surrendered our lands. Treaty 6 is a peace and friendship treaty. It is not a cede and surrender. In your colonial education systems, you are being taught that these are cede and surrender treaties, which is a lie. The reason why I say that is because I'm a direct descendant of treaty people, And every time that the elders have talked about the treaties, they've always maintained and were very strong in saying that we never ceded and surrendered. So when I first started going into law school, I began to explore that, and I can absolutely say with full confidence in supporting their statement in saying that we never ceded and surrendered. And I state that very confidently before you as a person who has researched Treaty 6. Now, the hunting lands that my family and I are defending and protecting, along with other lands, are lands that have been in our family long before any white people came here, long before the treaties were ever negotiated and went into. We've always hunted on these lands. There's graves out there of my people that have been buried at the time, even when the Hudson Bay came with their disease-infested blankets. Now, while I was out there, and I realized that the clear cutters were coming, I started meeting with Saskatchewan Environment. It wasn't like we were hiding in the background and we were not knowing what was going on. We fully understood what was happening, and we began to meet with Saskatchewan Environment, and we told them these are our lands and these are our laws that have jurisdiction over these lands. And Saskatchewan Environment, knowing full well what they're going into, continued to clear cut in violation of treaty. One of the treaty terms and promises is that we are free to hunt and gather and fish. That's one of the treaty terms and promises. To this day, there's no consequences for treaty violations. Today, look at that image. That's a drone image of my people's lands. It once was a beautiful, astoundingly, incredibly beautiful boreal forest. This is a place that we used to hunt. My grandfather's cabin stood there at one time. And my great-grandfather, my people walked these lands, and they came and they took the trees. Even as I stood there telling them, don't do it. Don't take our trees. You're in violation of treaty. You're in violation of Indigenous sovereignty. They didn't care. They absolutely didn't care. I went up to one of the loggers, and one of my best friends, and she's not here, by the way. My other best friends are here. But this other best friend, she told me, they're human beings too. You should go up to them and talk to them and tell them. And this was what was going through my mind. So I went up to them, and I walked up to them and I said, you're taking the trees from my father's hunting lands. You're also contributing to climate change. And the guy stood up because he was underneath the logging truck. He stood up. I swear to God, he was like 6'5". I was like, oh. And the first thing he said is, lady, I don't give a fuck. Fuck off. That was the first thing he said to me. Here I am, basically all alone there. My brother was gone during that time, and I had my nephew in the car, and that's what I was up against. So I thought, okay, this was not a good idea. So I started backing off. And then that one day, we were out there. My dad refused to go out there to see the land and the destruction that was going on. But that one day, he decided to. And my brother took this picture, and I want to show it to you. My dad is 82, Curtis? About 82? Yeah. And this is the first time he's ever seen our land so destroyed. Who can hunt there? Where are the medicines? Where are the berries? And my grandfather's cabin once stood there. Total disregard, no respect, in violation of treaty. And if you came today, right now, but not right now because I have to go to Winnipeg, I have to leave about 5:30, and I apologize because I have to travel and share this story because the mainstream will not tell you this. Your colonial government is not going to share this. Your classrooms are not going to share this. Our lands have been stolen, and right now they're being pillaged and plundered. And if you think that I'm being dramatic, then come out there. I challenge you to come out there. Don't take my word for it. Research it. And if I'm wrong, I'll apologize, but I don't think so. I don't think I'll ever apologize because I'm the one that's out there. My brother is out there. We're out there and we get to witness and see the destruction. So my nephew and I were camping out there, and this is more like a symbolic blockade. We blocked the road leading into our hunting land, but there are several roads. You can go in from all sides, right? And that's exactly what they did. I could hear the machines 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning going on and on and on. And I was doing, my family and I were doing our best to stop them. So that one day, my nephew and I left. We went to go get supplies. And we were gone for about, 4 hours. And I have signage all over. And if any of you follow me on Facebook, I'm constantly putting signage up that says no clear cutting, no logging, no trespassing on Treaty 6 hunting lands. And a lot of times those signs get taken down. I don't know by who, but somebody does. But that one day we came back and somebody had shot up my signage. And that was, my brothers are hunters, and they told me that's a 30-30 rifle. So I don't know how you guys feel about it, but I took it as a threat. You don't shoot up signage that's put in the middle of the road, directly up that road leading into my shelter, to my family shelter. So I called the police, of course, and reported it. And the other day, my brother and I went back, and this is like the stupidity of people. We found an armchair right beside that sign. Somebody went and put an old armchair that you would find in a living room in the middle of the road right beside that sign. So whoever thinks that that was a joke, it isn't funny. You know, it's stupidity. But there's good news, a little bit. So while there's some funny stuff too, like my nephew and I are we were getting ready to. I did a call out because I could hear the machines coming. They're right there. They just feel like they're right there. They're gonna take the trees. So I thought, my nephew and I said, let's do a call out on Facebook. And then I did a call out, and then we were preparing for people. And then one white guy shows up. And I don't diminish his support at all. it turns out he's a fluent Cree speaker. He self-taught himself to speak my people's language, which was incredible. Here we are in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of my people's lands, and this white man shows up and he's speaking in my people's language, which was incredible. So him and I were talking in the language, and then I got the media involved and stuff, and then industry came. They drove up to the land, and they said to me, we're not going to clear cut this little tiny area. We won't clear cut, I promise. So they showed me the map of the location that they're not going to clear cut. So we managed to save that tiny piece of forest. And there was a lot of animals coming there now. But we managed to save it. And that's one of the streams that flows through it. It's a small, tiny victory. And I in this land defending, you have to take those small victories and celebrate them, because there's so much that could destroy and bring you down, so to speak. So today, we're still out there. I love it out there. I love my people's lands. I go to visit the grave sites of my ancestors, literally. They're like right there. There's graves of children. There's graves of adults that died during the epidemic. And our first treaty chief is buried out there, the one that took treaty. And I'm very fortunate that I am the child of parents that never went to residential school. And their parents didn't go to residential school, which is pretty amazing in this era. Their parents hid them away when the Indian agent and a priest came for the children. So today, we still carry the knowledge and remnants of memories of our freedom and our liberation. Because I tell you, my people do not have freedom or liberation. We don't. All you have to do is look at the racism in Saskatoon, and all you have to do is look at the Indian Act. Those are not our leadership. That's a leadership that's imposed by your colonial government. That's not freedom. Because every time the Indian Act leadership tried to resist the colonial government, they're made to starve. Their funding gets cut off. That's not leadership. So, my heroes are like Mandela, Madiba, Rosa Parks, because I can totally relate to that. I can totally relate to their struggle. Now, I speak about my people's laws. In order to speak about my people's laws, bawang kanihtani hiawin kan stohtaman ntay sinim ntini makupig skonoaw moya makwanta ni hiaw yasuna kamustati kami katsi kapapig squatamig. You must have the language. You must have been given the right to speak about our laws, because they're sacred and they're powerful. I am concerned when our laws are being spoken about and no protocol has been given. I was raised to speak about my people's laws that absolutely belong to the land. When our children are born, and I have 7 children, each one of my children are born with land. And they know that. If anything happens to me, my children are ready and prepared to take over our resistance and our revolution. Idle No More is a part of a long history of our resistance. Idle No More is not new. It's a long line of land defenders and revolutionaries, even while we were held prisoner in the small pieces of land called reservations or reserved lands. So today, I'm going to still keep dreaming that in my lifetime, my people will have freedom, that we will have liberation, and that we will have self-determination, and it'll be the Indigenous women that will lead the way. Because look at the situation we are in, that men are leading. And I'm talking about all men, not just the Indigenous men. We are in a pretty bad situation right now. And every time I say that, I am attacked as being a man-hater. I don't think so. I'm being really honest and stating something that a whole lot of people don't want to say publicly. But we're in a situation now that has brought us to, because of patriarchy and male privilege and misogyny, the hatred of women. So that needs to be talked about openly. Otherwise, we're headed into a future that is not good. It's not good. It is not good where we're headed. So thank you. Mstake naskum no. Minaksimantu kasawimgoa. I want to thank every one of you. My people say that there's a reason why you're here to hear this message. It's not a coincidence. So take what you can from it and share it. Let people know that our lands have been stolen and that we have no freedom and we have no liberation. Iksa, thank you.
Sweet. Thank you, Sylvia. So my name is Mylan Tatusis, and I'm also part of the student group, the Indigenous Joint Action Coalition, and I'm also a PhD student here in the Department of Indigenous Studies. And we wanted to host this event and invite everybody out on this International Day of Solidarity with No DAPL. However, we also wanted to make the point that there are Indigenous struggles on this land base that are taking place locally. And we could jump in the car and drive a few hours and see sites similar to the site that was explained to you here by Sylvia McAdam. And there's not much hearts and minds in the settler community that are concentrating on those lands. And even though we stand in solidarity with Standing Rock and Red Warrior Camp and Sacred Stone Camp, we also keep in mind that there are struggles taking place on the lands beneath our feet, where our people come from, where our old people are buried. And we wanted to make that point, and that's one of the main reasons why we invited Sylvia to talk to the room today. And keeping that in mind, today being standing in solidarity with Standing Rock, we also want to emphasize and highlight the realities of certain industries that devastate and impact our traditional lands and territories. And we all know, ideally, I hope everybody realizes that there was a big oil spill close to my community, Palmaker Cree Nation, that took place this past summer, where a pipeline burst and leaked into the Saskatchewan River, impacting a lot of our hunting grounds and impacting the River Valley system, where we gather a lot of medicinal herbs and where a lot of the wildlife travel north to south across. And so our next speaker, Ricardo Segovia, is a Canadian Salvadorian hydrologist and has taken part in water and sanitation projects internationally in the Philippines, in El Salvador, Honduras. And he did the independent assessment on the July 20th, 2016 Husky oil spill in the North Saskatchewan River. So we're grateful to present the mic to you, Ricardo, to present your findings and also speak to the world we're living in today and how you view it.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mylan. Thank you, Sylvia and Alex, for having me back on your traditional territories. It's really an amazing honor to get invited back. And it's an honor to be sandwiched between two such powerful Indigenous women. Because from what I've seen on these lands and in El Salvador and Guatemala and Honduras, Ecuador and Peru, is that there are a few things more powerful than an Indigenous woman. And I know when the shit hits the fan, and the shit is already hitting the fan in many places, in Trump land and many other places, that's where I want to be standing. I want to be standing next to Indigenous women. That's why I'm very proud to be here. As Mylan said, I'm a hydrogeologist. I work with a nonprofit called ETech International. And I was called out here by Idle No More. And basically, what ETech does is support communities that are either dealing with contamination or are fearful that these mega projects are going to cause contamination on their lands. ETech was started about a dozen years ago by a guy named Richard Camp, who lives down in Santa Fe, and who's basically was dealing with a lot of contamination himself from smelters on the U.S.-Mexico border, and was realizing that there is no independent information getting to communities dealing with this kind of stuff. When things like the Husky spill happen, when things like the oil contamination in Peru are happening, communities have no technical people to turn to say, what's actually happening here? Is the company saying anything that's true? Is the company saying the truth when they say this oil spill is going to be cleaned up in 4 days? We need some more info. So that's why ETech exists. But since ETech focuses a lot on the Peruvian case and on the Ecuador case and a lot in South America, me and some of my friends who are also technically trained here in Vancouver, I'm originally from El Salvador, but I live in Vancouver, we started another group called Resurgence Environmental, which is basically doing the same thing that ETech is doing, but for the cases here in Canada. And so one of those cases was the Mount Poly disaster. That's really how Resurgence got started. Mount Poly is a mine in BC that destroyed a river and affected the fifth deepest lake in the world. And when 25 million cubic meters of tailings material from a mine spilled out of the tailings pond, and basically just took out an entire stream, and was a lot of that material ended up at the bottom of this lake, which is an amazing home for a lot of the salmon runs. And what the local people, the Saskatchewan people, who are also on unceded lands, and unceded is not just, I hear a lot when I studied at UBC, and at the beginning of every speech, everybody talks about unceded lands, and it becomes almost like a token gesture. But unceded means it was never given up. These are still Indigenous lands. We are still guests on these lands. And so more than just a quick mention, I'd like to say, this is actually a reality. It's not just a theoretical framework. We are on unsurrendered lands. And on the Secwepemc unsurrendered lands, this is where the disaster occurred. And the Secwepemc, they call Quesnel Lake, the Quesnel Lake that was affected by the spill, the birthing waters. It's so important for them and for the salmon that it's called the birthing waters. It's like when a woman's water breaks when she's giving birth. That's how significant this lake is to the Secwepemc. So here's some of our work down in South America. we realized that there's no better environmental assessment person or environmental monitor than the people who actually live there. So these are from many different communities who have come together and are fighting 40 years of oil contamination. So this is Achuar people, this is Kukama people, Shuar people, and Quechua, Quichua, and many others really coming together and using water as a focal point. Water becomes a real powerful tool for organizing. It becomes a real powerful tool for resisting this kind of abuse on their lands. And so this is us doing some training on how to do environmental monitoring, how to do soil texture, and those other types of things. And I'll talk a little bit about more detail later in the presentation. And this is some of the work we're doing with fish. We realize that the knowledge of fish that people have there is really the best way to use the vast knowledge that they have about their lands and use that in environmental assessment. So we can take all that knowledge that already exists and systematize it and say, okay, this is what's happening to the environment. This is how the environment is changing over time, and this is how it changes due to these big spills. Now, to focus in on what happened here, I hope, like we were saying, we hope that people know there was a spill here. I did speak at a high school in August or September it was, and a lot of the students didn't even know there was a spill, and the river runs right by their high school. So I mean, it's just shocking just how quickly this kind of thing disappears into the media, and how little attention is paid over the long term. Even though this isn't a one-time shot, a one-time impact on the river, this is a long-term impact. And this is what I want people to understand from this presentation about the Husky oil spill, is that it's a very long-term impact and that the spill continues to this day. So what we did when we came out here through the crowdfunding of Idle No More, we did some very focused sampling. So we did sediment sampling in August from the Toby Nola Bridge near the spill, where approximately 250,000 liters of oil spilled out of a pipe. And we ended up taking just a few samples because we had to be very, very careful with the money that we did have. We focused on sediments because after a few days, a few weeks, it's difficult to find stuff in the water. There's a lot of stuff that's going to evaporate, a lot of stuff that's going to sink. And so I'll talk a little bit about that as well. But this is basically where we took all our samples all the way up to Cumberland Lake. We didn't get all the samples we really wanted, but at least we got some idea of what's there. And we found contaminants much further downstream than the company was saying was affected. They were not going anywhere past PA, Prince Albert, and yet we found really nasty chemicals that are directly attributable to the spill at Cecil Ferry, and then the community at James Smith Cree Nation downstream of that also found these same chemicals in their samples. So this is us taking the sediment samples. This is Caudette Lake, I believe, and we're taking some other measurements there as we're doing the sampling. The foam you see there, I'll explain a little bit about what that is. That's usually a combination of oil and water. It's basically what would happen if you poured some crude oil into water in a blender and blended it up. The oil gets trapped inside the water, or the other way around, the water gets trapped inside the oil and creates this nasty foam that you see there. And of course, we saw a lot of crude oil. Near Toby Nola Bridge, there was still lots and lots of vegetation and the banks covered in crude oil. So it wasn't difficult to find the contamination. And we took a sample there anyway, even though we knew it was heavily contaminated, just so we can compare what types of chemicals we're seeing at the spill and what types of chemicals we're seeing down at Cecil Ferry and at PA and at James Smith Cree. And we did find that the same kind of chemicals. They're really, the nasty ones we need to worry about are the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. And if there's any chemists in here, you know what that is, the PAHs, because those are going to hang around for a very long time. The stuff you worry about at first is sour gas, H2S. You worry about the BTEX chemicals. That stuff is evaporating quickly and is very toxic, but eventually most of that disappears into the air. But the PAHs, they hang around for years and years and years. I'll explain a little bit why. This is just some of the stuff that can happen to oil. Now, what happened, out of sight, out of mind, right? And so as soon as the oil was invisible, this issue kind of disappeared from the media. But a lot of the oil that is no longer visible on the surface is now ending up submerged and sinking. Some of it does dissolve. Other parts of it disperse and end up creating these brown foams and then a lot of it ends up accumulating at the bottom of the river and affecting the ecology of the river and anybody who goes near those sediments in the long term. Now, the reason it sinks, I mean, oil usually floats on water, right? We all know that oil floats on water. But you can see in these two photos, the bottom one is in regular light, and the top one, I think, is a UV light that causes the oil to shine. And it's a picture of a particle, and these are the particles that form in a river with a lot of sediments. And so you see that the particle is about half oil and half other things, and those other things are soil or organic matter or something else that's going to be heavier than water. And so once you get this combination in the particle of oil and these other components like soil, you get these little particles that are actually going to sink to the bottom whenever the river slows down. And so you don't just get the floating oil, but you also get a huge percentage of it sinking to the bottom. And I keep driving this point home because it's being really ignored by Husky. And this is an example down in Michigan. There was a spill in the Kalamazoo River that was very similar material, very similar oil to the oil spilled here at the Husky spill in July. And they were pressured by the EPA. It's unfortunate that we don't have that same kind of pressure here by a group like the EPA saying, what are you doing about the submerged oil? What are you doing about this component of the oil? What are you doing about this contamination? So Enbridge was pressured in this situation to really get to work on this issue. And so they set up these cages that are they're called gabion cages. They're catching the oil-stained sediments as they're coming down the river. They started doing what they call poling, because basically they're just poking the sediments with poles and capturing whatever's floating to the top with these booms and these suction machines. They also did some dredging in those places where there was a lot of oil accumulation in the sediments. They started dredging a lot of those contaminated sediments. I don't know if anybody's familiar with what's happening with the Husky spill now, but it seems to me there's nothing happening. And that's what's really concerning, is that there's nothing happening now. And I came here from Vancouver expecting snow and ice and beautiful winter wonderland, and look how sunny and warm it is. There's no excuse to have stopped cleanup at this point. The river is not frozen over. There's nothing getting in the way of people getting to work on that river. So why isn't the North Saskatchewan looking like this right now? Why aren't people out there working to clean this up? That's my big question. So I mentioned the James Smith Cree. Husky was really reluctant to accept that there was contamination at James Smith Cree, that's downstream of Prince Albert, until these things started washing up on their shores. They started getting all this driftwood covered in crude oil. And at first Husky was saying it's not our oil, it could be anybody's oil, it could be from boats, it could be from the sunscreen that people wear. Those sunscreen also has those kind of chemicals. That's not a joke, that's actually serious. Somebody said sunscreen. And that could be the source of the chemicals. But when they went to James Smith Cree and saw this big pile of logs that really stunk up the entire office, it was very bad for those of us who had to stand in the office. There was a lot of BTEX coming off of that. But this is the evidence, the in-your-face evidence that it took for Husky to say, okay, it is our oil, here's some compensation. And so they give the James Smith Cree some money to make up for the money they had already spent on sampling and putting up their own booms to capture this kind of stuff. I'm still convinced that Husky didn't react for 14 and a half hours after the spill. There was a very detailed approximation in the media saying exactly where the spill was and at what time, at 8 o'clock on the 20th. And then Husky changed its story and said, actually, it happened the next day on the 21st. And so that was 14 and a half hours later. And thus 14 and a half hours travels very far on a river like the North Saskatchewan. And so all that oil that was pouring in overnight was allowed to travel much, much further than it really needed to. And that's why the cities of PA and North Battleford had to shut down their water supplies, because they found chemicals coming into their intakes. Now, Husky still denies that there was a delay, but I think there's ample evidence to suggest that there was definitely a 14-hour delay to their reaction. Now, it's in a place where you can get to somebody having a heart attack, you get to their house in 5 minutes. Somebody, ambulances can travel fast. Emergency response teams can travel fast. What kind of system is set up here that it takes 14 hours to get to a place that's accessible by road? It's inexcusable to take this long to react to a major disaster. Now, this is the by Husky's own description from their material safety data sheets, this is the stuff that's in their oil. I mean, it's no secret to anybody. I mean, it's toluene, benzene, and the PAHs that I mentioned, and everybody knows, and it's right there in their own sheets, that it causes cancer, it causes developmental problems, and it causes cancer again when you look at the PAHs. So there's no secret about how nasty these chemicals are. And like I said, the PAHs are the ones that don't go anywhere. I'll show a little clip from a news story here. That's basically Husky's experts saying that nature will take care of it. You know, First Nations reimbursed. I was talking about James Smith Cree. They're referring to the James Smith Cree here. This is in the National Observer. But they say nature expected to clean up the rest. You know, nature has an amazing capacity to heal itself, despite the monumental stupidity of humans. You know, nature somehow, you know, it still survives. But PEHs don't degrade by themselves. They're not just going to disappear. And so the majority of these chemicals, they may transform over time, but they're not going to go anywhere. And so to say that nature will take care of it is really irresponsible. And it's just a bold-faced lie, because these guys know what they're talking about. They know about basic chemistry. They know that PAHs will not degrade over time. And this was from a big report done by petroleum experts, people who work for the industry, people who know about this stuff, and not some, you know, hippie ecologists. This is their own words. And what they're saying, in soil, most PAHs are strongly sorbed to the organic matter, making them relatively unavailable for degradation processes. And so it just means they're not going to degrade. They're bound very tight to organic particles. They're not going to go anywhere. They're going to continue to be toxic for years to come. Now, to connect this to other problems that are happening, because this is a solidarity event, I want to talk about, you know, solidarity with the South, solidarity with Standing Rock. This is not an isolated incident, obviously. You know, the Husky spill is not just one in a million. This is a pattern of bad behavior by industry, not just in Canada, not just at the Mount Poly spill in BC, but also in Peru, in my own country of El Salvador, in Ecuador, in the places where we're working. This is just the way things function. This is business as usual, really. And this is just a continuation of colonialism. It's just a continued process of colonialism where very few people benefit from all the extraction of these resources, and the people who live on these lands have to suffer the consequences. Their story repeats over and over and over again. So this is what's happening in Peru. Anything you see in orange there, this is the huge province down in Peru in the north, in the Amazon. All the orange colors is where indigenous territories overlap with oil lots. And so the oil blocks, you can see there's an obvious conflict of interest there, and where there's a huge potential for conflict, and there has been conflict, and there has been battles and torture and death as a result of this overlap, because the national government makes decisions in Lima, in the capital, and says, okay, we're going to draw this map, and it's very easy to draw lines across the map and not consider the people who are living there. So everywhere you see the overlap is a potential for conflict. And these are the kind of spills you see in Peru. This was 2015. And this is the state-of-the-art response to these spills. You know, getting young kids in the communities, paying them $10 a day, and because of the history of cultural degradation and because of removing the options that they have to survive, this is what they have to do to survive, is take the $10 and say, okay, we'll go clean up the soil. And so they'll go up to their neck in this oil spill and start filling up buckets and start filling up barrels, and that's what gets hauled away. This is a state-of-the-art response according to the Peruvian government. These are some older spills. It's basically, like I said, it's 40 years of contamination. Now it's getting closer to 45 years. And basically nothing being done to clean up these spills. It's taken a real strong push for organization between nations, between indigenous nations, nations that were historically in conflict with each other over territory, over traditional conflicts. But when it came to this issue, they all came together. They were able to form coalitions and say, you know, we need to tackle this problem because we need to put aside our cultural differences and take on this government, take on this oil company, because otherwise we're not going to survive. None of our nations are going to survive. I already mentioned the Mount Poly case. This is what it looks like. This is the mouth of Hazeltine Creek. Hazeltine Creek used to be 2 meters wide. And all the debris you see here, and the stuff that looks like twigs, are actually trees that are 20 to 30 meters high, that were 20 to 30 meters high when they were standing, like the ones that are still standing in the top corner. And it just created a swath of destruction that came down and affected Quinault Lake, one of the deepest lakes in the world. And like I said, Husky is not an isolated incident. This is happening in BC. Just days after this disaster, that same mining company got a contract for a brand new mine. Before they had even said how they were going to clean this up, the BC government gave them a new permit for another mine. After this disaster, there was an expert panel that was put together. There was a lot of hope from the public so that this would never happen again. What the panel said is that just in BC, we're going to see 2 of these disasters every 10 years if things carry on as usual. And yet nothing has changed. They haven't taken into account any of the recommendations of the panel. The companies still keep getting these permits, and the designs are the same as they were using before. So we're gonna expect to see 2 of these every 10 years in BC because the government does nothing to pressure the company to do its job properly. This is happening in Ecuador. We work with the indigenous monitors in Ecuador. There's a mine there that's proposed. I'll show a photo of that. This is the proposed mine in Ecuador. They want to put an open pit in the middle of the jungle. And I think anybody, it doesn't take an ecologist or a scientist to realize that if you put an open pit in the middle of the jungle, you're going to affect those rivers. Basically, a lot of the rivers are going to be destroyed, and the ones that are left are going to have seepage coming from these pits. So people are very, very fighting strongly against this. One of our closest allies, his name's Jose Tendetza, was always very outspoken about this mine. We started training him on how to measure different parameters in the river so he can have a baseline for his community. And he lost his life. He was found murdered with his hands bound and tied, floating at the bottom of the river. And it's this kind of thing that people are dealing with everywhere in the world. And it's usually on indigenous lands. Because indigenous lands have the curse of plenty. They have all the resources. They have all the gold, all the oil, all the logs. They're there on indigenous lands. And so this is the kind of stuff that indigenous people have to deal with from north to south. I thought it was very powerful what Sylvia mentioned about her parents not allowing them to go to residential schools, not her grandparents not allowing her parents to go to residential schools. It's a real act of revolution. It's a revolutionary act to do something like that because it gives people a lot more strength to deal with stuff like this. And one of the guys came up to Vancouver, actually from Ecuador. He had a very similar story. He said his grandfather hid him away when the white people wanted to come and take them to the schools. And so since his grandfather generation, he had it's the same story. They just hid away and kept living their traditional lives. And as a result, he's a very powerful medicine man. So he visited Vancouver, and he was hosted by a house full of, a communal house full of hippies. And these hippies kept getting sick. They kept getting colds and fevers. And, every few weeks, the whole house would just be sick. It was probably 6 or 7 people living there. And this friend from Ecuador, his name's Flavio, he said, "Oh, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. I'll take care of it in my dream time." And so he took his guayusa tea, and in his dream time, he just basically went into the house and got his broom and just swept away all the negative energy that was in the house. And everybody in the house got better. Everybody in the house was cured. And it's that kind of power that comes from sticking to the land, from being from the land, being of the land. It's that kind of magic that is lost as a result of this kind of project, is lost as a result of people getting pulled into the armies, of people getting pulled into the rubber boom in Peru. All those things that along the way have destroyed these cultures. This is Jose, who I mentioned, who lost his life because of resisting the mine in Ecuador. But as Sylvia also said, it's important to have a bit of good news, because it seems like there's so much insanity now in the world with Trump getting elected, with other crazies getting elected. In the Philippines, they've elected a murderous president who in the first couple months of his term has already murdered 5,000 people. because this war on drugs is actually a war on the poor. And they're murdering drug addicts. They're not murdering kingpins. They're murdering street people. They're murdering street kids who happen to be addicted to drugs because of their poverty. And so with this kind of craziness, it seems like something's got to give. Something's got to break. And I think we're getting close to that breaking point. I think Trump is just another sign that we're getting close to that breaking point. So in a way, in a very crazy way, it's hopeful because it's a sign that something is coming to an end, that this system has to collapse at some point, and it's its last-ditch effort, its last desperate attempt to cling onto power, to cling onto the colonial states, to cling onto imperialism. And I think it's ready for a collapse, and I really hope I get to see it in my lifetime. And so there's these glimmers, like in my country, El Salvador. They've been battling a mining company that came in 2009 and murdered a couple of people who were in opposition to the mine, and then worked hard to push the mine through. The government banned mining, and as a result, because of these free trade agreements, if anybody's an economist, you know what these free trade agreements are all about. It's basically giving corporate rights and not about giving human rights. And so it gives the company the right to sue El Salvador for $300 million because of loss of profits, because of a project that they never got to build. And so they've been battling this for the last, since 2009. And just a couple weeks ago, they said, okay, El Salvador won the decision in the court, and they don't have to pay this $300 million to the mine. And this is significant because it means a country has the right to say no. And that's a pretty big deal because in most cases, in most free trade agreements, it's just understood that a country doesn't have a right to say no. If they get in the way of the profits, we'll just push them out of the way. But this is why it's very significant, and I'm very proud for this decision. And like I said, the water can be a very powerful focal point for people. And so this is what we saw in Peru. This is a group of Quechua, Achuar, and Kandoshi people all coming together in the same room. And another advantage that they have is that they all worked at the oil company at some point, or some of them still do, and so they know how everything works. They know how the oil lots work, and so they went as a united people and shut down the oil wells and basically stopped the flow of oil to the coastline. And when that money stops flowing, that's when the government perks up its ears. They say, oh shit, this is costing us many millions of dollars a day. We got to go and negotiate. And so the government came to the table. They came into the middle of the jungle with the premier of the government and said, okay, what can we do so that you're not going to stop our production anymore? And so they signed agreements to get potable water. They signed agreements to start recognizing the indigenous monitors as legitimate parts of the environmental assessment process in Peru. And they've put down some money now for cleanup. It's a very small amount of money, but it's the first step. And it's this kind of pressure and this kind of unity that can happen around issues like water because it's so essential for all of our survival. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo. So before we move on to the next speaker, how many people are sort of having a hard time coming to terms with the realities of the world we're living in? Put up your hand. Good. This is what IJAC wants to do. And we want to give a shout out to some of our supporters in the room, Department of Education, Sheila McLean, Robinez, Department of Indigenous Studies, a lot of observers in the room unannounced. We'd like to welcome CSIS, who's probably somewhere here. If you could put up your hand, that'd be great. But before we move on to the next speaker, we want everybody to sort of stand up. Everybody stand up in the spirit of coming together to solve these problems. We want you to introduce yourself and shake the hand of somebody around you that you do not know. Shake their hand and introduce them. Introduce yourself. There you go. Breaking down walls. Somebody else now. Somebody else. Good. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Awesome. So, if you're on Facebook, if you're on Twitter, look for the hashtags, look for the retweets and the Facebook shares. So a little bit of housekeeping before we jump on to the next speaker. So passing the mic over to Erica. She's going to give some context to the next speaker and diving into this conversation. I'd encourage you to stay for the panel discussion because there's going to be some epic truth bombs in there that are really going to motivate you and give you some new insights and perspectives.
Tanse again, everybody. Thank you, Mylan, for doing that exercise with us. I think it's really good that we're all here together again. And I wanted to thank Ricardo for his brilliant work and his continued work in this place and helping us as people of this land. I want to say thank you to everyone in the room who's here with an open heart and an open mind because we had sort of an incident we just had to deal with where, and this is sort of like an example of what Indigenous women land defenders, what Two-Spirit land defenders face. Most days is there was a threat of violence against one of our panelists. This is like just something that is sort of kind of seems par for the course. And something that Ricardo said was, this is the last grasps, the last struggles of these systems before they fall, because they know that they're falling. So when we're willing to stand up here and talk about misogyny and white supremacy and name it in these spaces on this land that is sacred Indigenous territory and a gathering space for centuries before the university was here, when we name those systems, people are afraid. So thank you for staying here. Thank you for listening with an open heart and an open mind. So to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Alex Wilson, a mentor of mine, someone who's brilliant, someone I love very deeply. She's a Cree person from the Pasquac Cree Nation. She's an associate professor and the academic director of the Aboriginal Education and Research Center at the University of Saskatchewan. She completed her BA from California State University, Sacramento in 1994, and her Ed.M. from Harvard University, and her Ed.Doctorate from Harvard University in 2007. Her scholarship is about Two-Spirit identity, history, pedagogies, teachings, and she addresses violence in our communities as well, and from external our communities. She's one of the organizers of the Idle No More movement since the very beginning, integrating radical education movement work with grassroots interventions that prevent the destruction of land and water. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Alex Wilson on the stage.
Thanks, Erica. Wow, that's kind of upsetting to hear that women's bodies threaten people so much that they're going to threaten violence. But if any of you read the Amnesty International report that came out a couple days ago, it makes very distinctly and strongly the case between resource extraction and the parallel to violence against Indigenous women. So it is really important that we're here. We're here to support Standing Rock, but we're also here to support people on the front lines, right here in our own community. Sometimes that means our students that are sitting in this room. So how many of you are Indigenous students of Indigenous ancestry? Professors or people that work here or people from the community? Put your hands up if you're Indigenous. So we have the right to be here. This is our territory. It predates treaties by not just 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, by tens of thousands of years. We have lived continuously on our homelands longer than any other people on the planet. So we have a right to be in this room. We have a right to validate our knowledge systems. That's why we have that star blanket there. It's not clip art. It's not to make the room look pretty. It's to acknowledge first and foremost that our cosmology links to our worldview, which links to our pedagogy, the way we teach, and the way that we go about being in this world. That's what it's connected to. It's our bigger place within the universe. So we may just be individual pieces of energy, or you could say, in Cree, the word for star is achak, or katachak is your spirit. So there's an understanding that there's a continuity of energy that comes from something much bigger that none of us know about. So there's a humility built into that. But what we do know is that we didn't just survive on this land. We didn't just exist on this land. We thrived on this land. And so a testament to that is all of us being here today. And I really thank the panelists that came before, and Mylan and Erica and all of the rest of you that are here. I am from the Opaskwayak Cree Nation, and for those of you that have been there, you know that it's downstream from Saskatoon. It takes about 3 weeks to paddle there. I don't know how long it takes oil to get there. But yeah, exactly. But we do know that for the past 100 years or so, Indigenous people in this area have been seen continually as impeding progress. My dad was a student here from 1964 to 1968. And at that time, there were very few Cree students going to school here, but they were just as active as we are today. And one of the main things that they brought to the attention of the world was the building of the Gardner Dam and a sacred rock that was there. So students came together around that land defense, water defense, to protect that rock. Eventually the rock was blown up, unfortunately, but that was just one thing of many that we continue to deal with on a daily basis. So we are here in solidarity, and you'll see on the event notice that it says Canahoose Manuel was going to be here. I'm obviously not Canahoose. For those of you that know her, you'll know that there are some similarities between us, but also some differences. And the reason why she can't be here is because she's on the front lines right now doing this work. All of us that were on the panel, except for Ricardo maybe, have been to Standing Rock. So we've witnessed and felt and experienced the degree of violence that the police state is enacting there. The whole place is surrounded by snipers, surveillance, double-wired razor wire, helicopters, armed personnel vehicles, police in riot gear with mace, and security with weapons. So this is not just a come together, be happy kind of thing. This is a serious event that's happening right now. So we're showing our solidarity, but also sharing information so that all of you know that at any time our land will need that protection as well. And we really do hope that all of you that are here can show your support for Sylvia or for any of us that are doing land protection in our own regions. I mentioned that I'm from Opaskwayak because everything that goes in the river here impacts us downstream, right? And we've known that for a long time. One of the things that's happened historically is hospitals have dumped their contaminants in the river. Farms have the phosphates from fertilizers, et cetera, have drained into the river. City sewage and drainage from streets have drained into that river. And so you can see all of that goes downstream. And so we feel the impacts in, as Leanne Simpson says, asymmetrical ways. And the we that I'm talking about are people that live downstream, but primarily Indigenous people that, for many of us, still rely on the river. Some people drink straight out of the river without filtration. it impacts the fish, obviously, and all the other animals. So there's some other things also that are impacting the Saskatchewan River Delta. Saskatchewan River Delta is one of the largest freshwater deltas on the planet. It's considered to be the lungs of the planet because there's so much muskeg, and for those of you from there, in my region, we're Swampy Cree, and for good reason. It's very swampy. There are a number of factors such as the Campbell Dam, or the Gardner Dam, sorry, the Campbell Dam in Nipawin, the Manitoba Hydro Dam, and an American corporation. Any guesses which one? Manitoba Hydro, Sask Power, and one corporation control all the waterways in northern Manitoba and the Saskatchewan Delta. Any guesses? Halliburton, no. No. Ducks Unlimited. Ducks Unlimited. Friendly hunters protecting the wetlands. No. For decades, Indigenous people have known that Ducks Unlimited have been controlling the waterways through damming and other creating channels. So with some people say the intent of diverting water, because people have known for a long period of time that fresh water is going to be a commodity. So when you have two ideologies around water, one being that water is life, you've all seen the hashtag, but you all know for Indigenous people that was our life way, travel, just for drinking water, etc., but also how we got around. Another ideology where a watt of power from water equals money. So when the two clash, you have a situation of urgency, and that's the situation that we're in right now. So land is very important to all of us. There's some talk around genocide, and of course there was controversy around whether it really is genocide. We'll just call it cultural genocide, the kinder, more gentle kind of genocide. But along with genocide comes epistemicide, and I really want to ask people to think about what that concept means. And there have been Indigenous scholars that have done research and studies and written about this epistemicide. Sandy Grande, Rebecca Sock-Beeson Cardinal are two of them. Epistemicide is the severing of knowledge systems that comes with the displacement or disconnection from land. So Sylvia talked about it, Ricardo talked about it, Erica and Mylan also talked about it, but the impact of epistemicide cannot be understated, especially in the institutions that we're in right now. Ricardo talked about Mount Poly. The elders at Mount Poly, after that tailing pond spill happened, one of them said, during the residential school era, the children were taken from the land. And she said, but during this current era, the land is being taken from the children. So it's a very deliberate attempt to not just displace people for resources, but to take land, but also disconnect from land knowledge, because our knowledge systems are intimately connected to land, and by land I mean land and all its relations, aski, in my dialect, our dialect, which means that includes the universe, the wider universe, and stars, for example. So we're all part of that. That includes water. I think that because I was just kind of asked at the last minute to speak, I didn't have a PowerPoint or anything, but I just did want to make a couple of those points for you to think about. I'll just end by saying, to keep things on kind of a forward momentum, that this is, the 4th anniversary of Idle No More. For those of you that don't know, Idle No More started here in this area in Saskatoon, and now it's a global movement. And when actions are happening, people don't necessarily have to put the hashtag Idle No More on it. That's not the point. The point is that we have a worldwide movement around land protection, around the protection of water, around understanding, promoting, and validating Indigenous knowledge systems and treaty rights. And the current iteration is called Idle No More. So I think that's something to be hopeful and to celebrate. The movement started because of the increased erosion of Indigenous sovereignty rights and environmental protection. So the introduction of Bill C-38, Bill C-45, which were part of the omnibus bills, over 420 pages, that legislated, made it legal to give more power to corporations for resource extraction, for pipelines, and for contamination of waterways especially. And now we see Bill C-51 being introduced again. C-51 will make it illegal for us to protest acts that degrade environmental protection and treaty and sovereignty rights. And that's exactly what's happening in the United States. That a corporation has so much power that it can just do what it wants. And that's what the people are standing up to. It's not just about oil. It's not just about Standing Rock. It's about ideologies. And so when is it that our knowledge systems are going to be validated? Indigenization sounds good, but this is the reality. We have valid knowledge, we have valid science, we have all of that. So we're at a time now, and I think the energy of Idle No More, of course, has allowed us to come together and meet some incredibly amazing people. And many of you in this room have been part of Idle No More, and whether you like it or not, you are now. Because CISA sees you. But I just wanted to end with that, and I guess congratulate all of us for the work that we're doing, and also to remind us that this is hard work. It's very important. And so never underestimate the power that you have as an individual that's part of a larger constellation. And so with that, I'll say, Kinanaskmit now. Thanks.
Yeah, so we'd like to invite the panelists up to the table, take a seat. And we're going to take one question for Sylvia McAdam because she has to leave. So if there's one question from the audience, a burning question, feel free to ask it. But she'll be taking one question, then she has to leave. Yep. So the question was, what are some of the most direct ways people could help? Specifically, Sylvia's land-based resistance? Yeah. So specifically for you, Sylvia.
Is this on? Okay. All right. I guess I was a panelist that just got threatened. So my brother and my other friend are going to walk me out to go to the airport because I don't feel like fist fighting right now. Okay. Your question. Go back to that. Write to your government, your colonial government. Write to them. Find out what clear cutting does. Because I'm not against lumber. Let me make that clear. I'm not against lumber. What I am against is the clear cutting. The method in which they're going in to take the trees. Clear cutting and logging are two different things, right? Clear cutting totally devastates the land, and they take everything. They just wipe the land clean. They really don't leave very much standing. Logging, selective logging, is more sustainable, but preferably we should be looking at alternative housing like hemp and sustainable off the grid, those kind of things. And this government is not being pressured into looking into those alternative ways of living on the land and also our shelters. And get yourself informed about Treaty 6. Get past the stereotypical narrative, like all Indians are junk or all Indians get everything for free, And yet, the biggest example that I give to people is they say that we get education for free. Yet when you look at the French education system, one child, a French child in elementary or high school gets $19,000. And a provincial child in the province here gets $11,000. My grandchildren who attend the education system on reserve are given $3,434. There's no rhyme or reason for that. No reason to be given that amount of money. So look past the colonial, racist narratives that are out there. It's going to take courage to do that. And I really encourage all of you to do it. Because the things that I talk about earlier, I was being very blunt because I reached a point where I'm just past those really nice, let's hold hands and run through the meadow, We're all headed to a climate devastation, and I think we're past holding hands. We all need to move quickly to mitigate or stop the destruction. Right now, it's a privilege for me to sit here to talk about Treaty 6. In other parts of the world, their dialogue and their discussion is not about sovereignty. It's not about colonial laws. It's about where am I going to get water. I don't want to come back here in 10 years to have that kind of dialogue. Where are we going to get water, right? We want to be able to, we're fully capable of being able to mitigate that. And it's going to take your generation, the young people, because we sure as heck didn't leave very much for you. All we've left is a fight, literally a fight for your future. And so find your voice. I'm not going to tell you how to find your voice because the young people's voice is so energetic. It's so powerful and it's so creative. During Idle No More, if you remember this one high school in Calgary, I forget the name of the high school. Sheila might remember, I don't know. But this group of young people wanted to demonstrate and show they were against racism. So this high school got together. These young people thought of this on their own. They made like a coffin, a little coffin, and they got all of the high school students to write a goodbye letter to racism. A goodbye letter to racism. So they wrote their letters, and then they put them into the coffin, and they walked the coffin through their school. But it was a powerful message. Like, I've never forgotten it. It's still with me. I thought that was so powerfully creative. And that's your legacy. That's your creativity. And it's absolutely powerful. So I don't want to sit here and tell you this is how you must do it. Because every time the young people just blow me away with their messages as soon as they find their voice. But always look at it with a critical analysis. Question your government, question your MLAs, your MPs, just as much as I'm questioning the Indian Act leadership and I'm questioning all types of leadership within my nation. I hope that all of you will come away from this panel with your own thoughts and absolutely research what we're sharing here. Don't take our word for it. Go out there and learn it. Learn it. That's the most powerful thing you could do. But I have to go now, and I have to take a couple of people with me, take me to the airport to make sure that I'm safe. But isn't that really something that even here I have to be escorted out, right? Just because someone was uncomfortable with what I had to say. Okay, so thank you for the question. Like, I really appreciate that. Thank you. So take care of yourselves and just keep analyzing and teaching yourselves. Kinanasko na.
Kinana Skomitin. Thank you, Sylvia. All right, I remember Mylan and I actually drove down to Standing Rock earlier in the semester, and it shocked me how close it was. It took us about 10 hours to drive there, which I think is a reminder that border is fake. You know, that border wasn't there before. And the prairies have such a beautiful, wide range of and history of resistance, and that border, you know, it's 10 hours away. So it really brings it home to sort of head down there. And I know that Alex headed down to Standing Rock as well. So I'm wondering if our remaining panelists could give some reflections on each other's presentations, if you have any to add, or what do you think, where do you think the fight at Standing Rock, but more broadly prairie resistance and Indigenous resistance is at right now?
Well, can you hear me? I think there are many parallels, and you know, we kind of drew them out tonight. But there's a sense of urgency at Standing Rock. I think that you probably felt when you were there as well. To see how close it is to being a massacre. And so when Sylvia and I were there was the night when there was a fire that was lit. And because it's in a little valley, there's foothills all around. The fire was the whole west side. And they have footage of the people that lit it. So it was a lit fire. And so you could see within seconds it could have wiped out that whole community. There's about 5,000 or more people camped there. They're living off the grid, so they're modeling sustainable, healthy living, you know, in connection to the environment. I think that there are many different things across the prairies and in the boreal forest that are equally important that we address, and Sylvia brought up the clear cutting. Apparently the nuclear waste storage thing is coming up again, although we really tried to keep that out of the north of this province and our traditional territories. The contamination of the Saskatchewan River is a big issue. But then there's the other thing around how this impacts bodies. And so there's impacts on bodies of water, like we've been talking about, but also on human bodies. And so that's the human aspect to this. So I really want to remind people, like, the concept of body sovereignty is really important, that, you know, that every person has the right to have sovereignty over what happens to their own body. And often that's difficult when there's so many contaminants impacting you and not a lot of choices. So that, and then the connection also to gender fluidity too, because in our northern communities, northern Manitoba, for example, the suicide rates for LGBTQ two-spirit people are off the charts, 10 times higher than any other group. And some of you might recall the suicide crisis, as they called it, this summer in Cross Lake. What they didn't record in the news was that all of those girls that committed suicide were lesbian identified, Indigenous kids. So there's an added dimension to the intersection of environmental racism, homophobia, transphobia, and misogyny when they all kind of come together. And all that is linked to the land and displacement from land knowledge. Because once you're on the land, you very quickly see how things even out. People do what they're good at. If you're not good at one thing, you do something else. And that worked for tens of thousands of years. But because of an imposition of a colonial system, many communities have aligned with heteropatriarchy, and so we see the fallout on, like I said before, asymmetrically on certain bodies, and those are queer youth or Indigenous women. So it's not by coincidence that, you know, that we are always constantly being vigilant around the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women. It's because that is a priority. And that's one of the groups that has been impacted. It's not to say that men aren't missing either or murdered. When men go missing, though, research has shown it's usually for different reasons. So we need more research in that area too. So, thanks. Andre?
Sure, I'll respond first.
What was that word that you used for like the genocide of traditional knowledge?
Epistemicide. Yeah. Epistemicide. Yeah. So if you think of epistemology, like that's knowledge, and the side is like the killing of, so genocide, femicide, epistemicide.
I guess, well, I haven't been to Standing Rock myself, but I think what's happening there, more than the day-to-day that's happening at Standing Rock, it's really become more of a symbol. And I think it's a symbol that, like I was saying before, things are coming to a head, and that Indigenous resistance is reaching new heights. I'm seeing that in South America as well, even though those battles don't get as much attention. People are having similar battles or even worse battles down in Guatemala, down in Peru and Ecuador. But it's difficult to get it to do everything at once, to get attention to everything at once. You know, Leo DiCaprio can only be in so many different places. But I think it's a message for everybody here, especially people who ask, you know, what can we do? I think it's important to remember that if we had to talk about all the problems that are happening in the world, all the different battles, you might need 60 or 70,000 slides up here. And we'd be talking for days and days. And so it's a matter of, as Alex said, recognizing what you're good at and what you're not good at. And then saying, okay, whatever skill I have, whether it's baking, whether it's, you know, hunting, or who knows, that's how can I direct that towards dismantling the insanity system? And that's the question that I've always asked myself. Okay, what am I good at? I do some hydrogeology, and you know, I can cook. You know, how can I use those skills to contribute to dismantling the system of insanity? And not everywhere at once, but how many places can I be and still be effective? Can I be in Saskatchewan, Peru, and Ecuador and still be effective? Okay, I can do my part. Am I going to be able to go to everywhere and do, you know, try and be in solidarity with everybody? No, it's not possible. And so really thinking of finding that balance. What do you know how to do? Find the balance with what you don't know how to do. And finding the balance with how much can you do compared to how much will you do before you start destroying yourself. And so really being able to focus your skills, focus your talents on where can I actually have an impact? Where can I be in most direct solidarity with people who are standing up to fight these systems?
I'll just add one thing too. Don't underestimate also the power of social media. I know sometimes we say, well, it's just one type of activism. It is, but Bronwyn Carlson, who's an Indigenous Australian scholar, she did her dissertation on social media and Indigenous communities. What she found was that even though Indigenous peoples are numerically a minority in terms of numbers in colonized countries such as US, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia, we're a majority on social media. So social media has not just been a way to kind of equalize what's going out there, but it's been a way to create a new media that shares information around land defense and water protection and just in general creating our own media. So that's kind of a hopeful thing. But our relatives in Mexico, Central and South America don't have the same kind of access to social media because we see people being murdered for tweeting out messages. So we have to figure out how to also stand in solidarity with people whose lives are in danger of just by sharing information. So.
All right, thank you, Alex and Ricardo. We're going to take some questions from the audience now. So if you could please use the microphones just so everyone can hear, that would be great.
Hi everyone. As Mylan said, my name is Alora Den. I am the co-chair on the Indigenous Graduate Student Council. My family is from the Haida Gwaii Islands in northwestern British Columbia. I had a question that I think I need to contextualize in the recent elections. So we all know Trump was elected. I think a lot of us were very surprised by that. And I think a big reason for that is that humans tend to put themselves into bubbles. So we surround ourselves with people who think the same way that we think. So most people in this room are probably fairly liberal, environmentally minded, very concerned with the topics at hand. I'm wondering if our panelists have any advice for how we can reach outside of our bubbles, how we can effectively communicate with people who think very differently from us without being condescending, without being aggressive, but to open that dialogue, to have open communication with people who might have very different thoughts.
Well, you can take classes in the College of Education, Sheila McLean and Verna St. Denis. No, but I think it is, the question you're asking is important because it's ultimately about pedagogy, right? But I think there's room for all kinds of pedagogy. So sometimes we need those people that are really irritating and argumentative and pushing people's buttons. And other times we need people that are very gentle and, you know, just can state things in a way. So there's room for everyone. In terms of the bubble, sometimes it's a good idea to kind of stay within your bubble. And that's a word of advice after 50 years of popping bubbles, I guess. Just for self-preservation, right? But, you know, people always say maybe we're preaching to the choir because everyone here is kind of like-minded, but even within this room, there'll be a range, and even choirs have to practice. You know, many people have said that. So starting with your own family is always a good idea, because even within all of our families, there'll be a range of, you know, ways of thinking and acting upon things. So I think, you know, Priscilla Sitti's over there, she's got a book that the word translates to persistence or to keep going, you know, and so that's kind of another word of advice, is just to keep going and remember that you're not alone, that there's others doing it.
I think what I've noticed when I talk to people who are the most aggressive, the most crazy, and, you know, in terms of the things I believe in, there's also something about them that tells me that there's a lot of pain there. And so what I've seen, I noticed this down in Peru and also sometimes in El Salvador, the people that want to attack you the most aggressively are the ones that are dealing with some kind of pain in themselves, some kind of attack that they've never healed from themselves. And that's what drives them to want to attack everybody else and just continue that cycle. I'm not a psychiatrist, but this is what the impression that I get. And so I've found that when I encounter these crazies, that I've had some luck taking a very gentle approach and a very patient approach. And so it takes a lot of time and a lot of patience, and you got to check your own biases. You got to say, okay, how is it possible that we live in the same place, sometimes we're even in the same family, like Alex was saying, and yet we think so differently? And so you take the time to really first check your own biases and then say, okay, how come this person thinks so differently compared to what I think? And then you take the time, you take the hours and hours, and you find that eventually you can break through their bubble a little bit, and they start to, rather than attack you, they start to ask you questions. And they say, okay, how come you think this way? Or explain a little more about what, you know, this issue. And they get curious. So there is those spaces where you have hope of getting in other people's bubbles, and you have hope of really going from bubble to bubble and existing in different spaces. And so the way I talk to a crowd like this is different than I'm going to talk to the people I went to school with in engineering, because they have no idea about any of this stuff. and the engineers are very narrow-minded. They only see their Excel spreadsheets, and so you got to be very gentle with them and introduce them to this slowly. Don't use big words, but eventually you have luck. And then there's some that are completely out to left field, and they're just out to destroy. And you can tell. But I think those are the very tiny minority, the ones that you can't reach, the ones that are just out to kill and destroy and end life on this planet. I think that's a very tiny majority, and that's what gives me hope.
Question over here.
I'm just looking for a general comment or maybe your feelings on the state of journalism here in Canada regarding the issues that we're discussing today in this room.
I think we need work. I think that's why one of the TRC calls to action specifically dealt with media, right? But I don't know, Maura's done a really great job of providing media that's for communities that wasn't there before, and there's many other media outlets such as Red Rising magazine or Give Me One magazine or what's Canahoos's West Coast Warrior Women Warriors. Yeah. What's that? Yeah, the West Coast Women Warriors. So we support them, and we all work together, like sharing information, and we do training on using different forms of media. So there's kind of a network that's emerging around the world, in spite of the lack of attention that mainstream media has given Indigenous issues. So I think it's something that really needs a lot of work, and maybe we don't even need the mainstream media anymore. Like the research is showing on social media, that we really have a handle on it. So,
just to enlighten, give some perspective on that question with the journalism is, it has been a very eventful summer here in the Prairie Provinces with the Colton Boushie incident, which we held a panel on also. We do have allies in mainstream journalism who have been covering our IJAC events, and we wouldn't have been as successful without them. And just to give a little spin to this, if you cover the Indigenous issues, chances are you're going to get called somewhere else to do some other work. And whether that's good or bad, we don't know. But for all the journalists out there, be brave enough to ask those questions and step on the front lines with us, because it has been an ally this summer in this region. And the reporter, unfortunately, has been called back to another mainstream area, probably because he's been successful at delivering those stories and caught the attention. So there is a pro and con. And at the same time, Indigenous journalists, there's a lot that are up and coming that we definitely need to maintain our relationship with also as well.
If I may just quickly make a plug for a couple of journalist friends of mine. They made a documentary about the Northern Gateway pipeline, the line in the sand, the context and consequences of the Northern Gateway. And although it is a different location and a different territory, it's very pertinent to the things that we're talking about today. So you can find that on Vimeo if anyone wants to go find that and watch it. Or you can contact them directly through their website.
Cool. If you post that on the IJAC Facebook page, that'd be great. Line in the Sand's a pretty good documentary too. Next question on the left side.
Hi, you guys. Okay, so I guess this question is kind of specific, but it has to do with community responses to oil spills. So from what I understand, sometimes straw bales are used in cleanup, and I'm just thinking we're from Saskatchewan and we have plenty of those. So if a community wanted to respond on their own, since we've seen that corporate and government responses are pretty insignificant, what would be the best way for a community to act immediately?
I think a good place to start is Lila Darwish's book, Earth Repair. Talks a lot about community response to emergency. She was with me when we were doing the sampling on the North Saskatchewan. And yeah, read her book, Earth Repair, that's my plug. But basically, to get specifically speaking about the straw bales, I think more and more, as I see government dropping the ball and industry dropping the ball when it comes to cleanup, more and more communities are really going to have to step up and be ready when stuff like this happens in the first few minutes, even just to stop stuff from spreading. So yeah, stuff like straw bales can stop oil from spreading. At the same time, I think it'd be interesting to put together, if it doesn't already exist, like a community action plan. I think Lila might actually have some already, where you have to take those measures to protect your own safety. So you have to make sure you have the right kind of boots, the right kind of gear, so you're not going to expose yourself to really nasty chemicals every time you're going to try and respond to something like this. That's number one. Number two is, okay, what materials do you have locally to respond to this? And straw bales can definitely be something that can stop the flow, and something that oil loves to stick to, because oil was once plants and animals and organic stuff, and so it likes to stick to organic stuff. They've used straw bales, they've used cotton, they use hair from hair salons, and stuffed into pantyhose to make booms. You know, all sorts of nutty things, but that can actually work if they're well organized. And if you have somebody who actually has done this before, really running the response. Because there's also the risk of doing things that are completely useless and they're going to waste money. So in Vancouver, we had a relatively tiny spill from an oil tanker that was in front of the coast, and some of that oil made it to the shore, and people started, freaking out. Obviously, they should be freaking out. But then there was certain groups that were the loudest and that were even able to get funding, and their plans were dropping mushrooms out of airplanes and things like that, because they know that mushrooms can break down oil. But not when you drop them out of airplanes. You have to make proper mushroom bags that are, they're growing and the mycelium is spread, and you can do amazing things with mushrooms. The other person that was with me is Danielle Stevenson, and she does DIY fungi on Vancouver Island, and she does this kind of stuff for small businesses who have a lot of oily things lying around. They don't know what to do with them. She actually breaks that stuff down with oyster mushrooms and other kinds of mushrooms. And you can do amazing stuff on a local level. And like I said, it's going to become more and more important as we discover just how many contaminated sites we have in the world, and just how little support we're going to get from big industry and from big government.
Okay. Does anybody know if we have any grassroots organization like that in Saskatchewan right now?
Anybody in the room in general?
Not one formed in these areas yet.
Not in this area
No,
specifically.
there are some that, like David Wolf and other people were involved in, with the mycelium running, and they did the Shaga books. So their studies are done, but they're not here. It's based
All right.
on the West Coast.
Thanks.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, my name is Naomi Maina. I'm originally from Kenya, and I've been here for going 3 years now. And I want to thank the panelists for the discussion and all the organizers for organizing this today. My question is about how to effectively build collaborations in solidarity with Indigenous communities in Kenya, in Canada, with Saskatchewan, with international students from other countries, because some of these things that are happening here are also happening back in our countries. And we might not have, the media or technology as some of the South American friends or protectors to kind of, publicize or create awareness around what's happening. So my question is, how do we effectively build those collaborations and support what's happening here, because it's really what's happening back home as well. And also just wondering, as students, we are locked up in these institutions that make us publish and write journals, and you really take up all our time, such that we don't really have time to come out to events like these or to go to protests or see what's happening outside of the institutions. So I was just wondering, how do we navigate, or how do we incorporate some of this work in our studies? Because our funding, narrows our research, and so we're caught up in 5 years of research that doesn't have anything to do with grassroots or making real change. So how do we navigate the academy to be able to free up some of that space to be able to do work that's really making meaningful change on the ground, and not just going into publications that are not accessible to everybody? So.
Well, I have to quote my brother on this one, Sean. He says, if research doesn't change you, you're not doing it right. So, the implication in that is, if you're going to spend that amount of energy, resources, and time to do research, make sure that it's going to make some kind of difference. You know, I know that that may not be the reality for everybody, but that is one of the privileges of being in an institution, right? That you do have some choice in what you decide to study. I think the teach-in model is really effective because it goes beyond the university. It brings in community, and you know, like we had the People's Free University, that was a way to partner between academics and community people around different knowledge bases, and to share that in a free way. And so if anyone's interested in continuing with that, that's something that, you know, that can happen here in the community. We had it at Station 20 West. And the teach-in model is kind of, you know, if people think about it in terms of the 60s and hippies and stuff like that, and free love and all of that. Now love costs. We know because it's happened to the land, right? It's been at a cost. But teach-ins are a really great way to get people together around an issue, but not just share information, but activate people. So that's the difference between a lecture or a discussion. It's like there's an activation component to it. And in this room, the activation today has been to look in your own community and see what your local issues are, no matter how small. And whether you're doing research or writing about it or whatever, to kind of take it on or make a commitment to take something on.
I guess I'll just say that if you're studying or living in a rich, predominantly white nation, there's probably somebody there or everybody there who's implicated in the exploitation of somebody somewhere else. And so I think one thing that I would suggest is find that link. And so in my case, let's say El Salvador or Guatemala, the link is very direct. The mining companies that are exploiting Guatemala and El Salvador, or attempting to exploit El Salvador, are based in Vancouver. They're downtown. We know where their offices are. We know where that direct connection is. So I think that's another thing you could do, is find those direct connections between exploited and exploiter.
All right, we have time for one last question here.
Hi there, my name is Melvin Morasti, and one question quick. When big oil companies come to decimate our traditional territories, and I say when, not if, because I believe that we're on our way to see that happen in the future. How can we prepare to stand up for their plans of development so that we do not experience the same atrocities that we see in Standing Rock? Thank you.
I think after working in communities in a lot of different countries, people are constantly asking me, is there a clean way to do this? Is there a clean way to get oil out of the ground and not destroy the environment? Is there a clean way to do mining and not destroy the environment? And I always say no. I've never seen any examples that do it in a clean way. There might be some that are more, less destructive, less dirty, but it's still a massive impact no matter how you do it. And even if we had all the technology, which mostly we do, even if we had all the technology to do it right, we're not going to do it right, because it's not a question of technology, it's a question of power. We have the technology, but somebody else has the power. And so they're going to decide to do it as cheaply as possible, as quickly as possible. They're going to take the profits and run. That's how it works here, that's how it works in Ecuador, that's how it works in Peru. And I see that time and time again. And so I would just suggest say no. That should be your first go-to reaction, is no. If somebody comes up to your territory and says, can I? No. Don't even wait for the question. Just say no.
Yeah, I would say also, if you're from a First Nations community, demand accountability and transparency from your own community, like from your own First Nation. And we do that with our chief and council or whatever your system is. And sometimes it's hard to say no because we know of all the different issues that intersect in our communities, but be informed, I guess, is another one. Because sometimes all of a sudden there's a meeting and a decision's already been made. By then it's often too late. So the more informed we can be, share information, I think the better.
All right, I'm gonna wrap this up now and say thank you to our panelists before I ask one final question, and we'll leave with some good words in our ears. You can find our future events and our information on the IJAC Facebook page, Indigenous Joint Action Coalition, University of Saskatchewan. My name's Erica Lee, this is Mylan Tatusis. Ricardo and Alex, I would like to ask you to end us off and tell us, in the face of all of the amazing, beautiful, constant work you do, what gives you hope?
That's easy. You give me hope. Yes, and all the people in this room that I learn from all the time, students mostly. Yeah, thank you.
What gives me hope is when I'm down in a place like Loreto in Peru, and people are laughing and having a great time with many, many more excuses than I do to be miserable and to get down on themselves and to feel hopeless. And yet they're thriving in many cases, and that's what gives me hope.
Kanana Skomatin, thank you for coming, everyone.